Me to come by and share on this. I love step two, one of my favorite steps. It's a very, very deep step to me. It's got many layers to it, I believe, and it's like a two-sided coin. It's kind of got a couple sides to it. Um, it's kind of like when I ask myself, what am I doing, right? The book talks about that I'm building a spiritual structure, right, through which I can walk a free man or woman at last. And I know last week was shared on step one, and that's going to be the foundation of my structure right there. And step two, the book talks about it's going to be the cornerstone, right? And if we know anything, if you know anything about building, especially if you're building an arch or anything like that, which the book talks about, the cornerstone's got to be pretty much perfectly in place, right? If it's even like a little bit off, by the time I get to the keystone, the structure's, will tumble or whatnot. And for me, that did happen quite a few times in a form of relapses. So I'm going to come out of the book quite a bit or whatnot and just kind of share my own experience with that. And they, so the first 43 pages are all dedicated to step one, right? And Bill dedicated a whole chapter to step two, which is we agnostics, right? And, I believe I'm not a big book guru, so I may be wrong with some of these things, but I'll do my best. And if I go against anything your sponsor's saying, you can disregard it or whatnot. Him or her's probably wrong, but that's okay. I believe agnostic is a Greek word, right? And it means without knowledge. And that was me when I got to AA. Agnostic means with knowledge. So when I got to AA, I was really without knowledge of God. It's not that I was an atheist. I did not believe in God. I just wasn't really quite sure. My limited perception of God was kind of like Santa Claus. It was like this old white guy in this cloud somewhere with a long beard and a robe and a stick, and was kind of judging me for all my wrongdoings or whatnot, and I better be a good little boy or else type thing. And was definitely something outside myself. And it's we agnostic starts off, in the preceding chapter, you learn something of alcoholism, and I think what we learned about alcoholism is step one up to this point, why we're powerless. And the reason we're powerless is because of the allergy is what separates me from a normie, nothing more, nothing less. So if I was sane and I had right about thinking, I would tell myself, well, just don't pick up the first one, just don't drink, right? But unfortunately, that allergy is accompanied with the obsession, and that's where the insanity comes in. And the insanity is not so much what I'm doing when I'm drinking, it's really what I'm doing when I'm stone cold sober. That picking up sounds like a good idea, that it's going to fix my problems. And I'm really, I believe the lie. I'm going against the lie, and I tell myself I'm only going to drink till 3:33 till my wife's halfway home, and then I'll put the bottle away, and it never turned out like that. So when it says came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore us to sanity, that's what they're talking about. I need to be restored to sanity. Sanity means like wholeness of mind. Insane would be like if my thinking was a pie, I'm just missing one piece. If I was missing half the pie or more, I'd probably be crazy, but I'm just missing a piece or two. So my thinking's less than whole. So I need to be restored to sanity so I can see my disease for what it is and act accordingly. And it says, ask yourself this, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, and that's that obsession, that thought that overrides all other thoughts, that somehow someday I'll be able to drink like other people. Or when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, and that's that allergy, that abnormal reaction when I put it in my body. Um, you are probably an alcoholic. And this is kind of where step two comes in. And if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So three things I need to know in recovery. The first thing I need to know is what's the problem? The problem is I'm powerless because of the allergy, accompanied with the obsession. So if I'm powerless, the answer to that is I need to tap into power. I need power, right? And the third thing I need to know is the course of action to take to tap into that power. And so step one is the problem. Step two is the solution. Steps 3 through 12 is going to be the action I'm going to take to produce the essential psychic change. So over on 45, it says lack of power. That was our dilemma, right? We had to find a power on which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. And here's the key words, but where and how will we define that power? And I want to talk a little bit about the where. I always looked at as God as something outside myself. And I'm just going to share my own experience. It was a Saturday morning. I was in rehab probably for, I don't know, the 10th, 11th time. And there was a gentleman doing a big book study. And he planted the seed of hope in me because I knew that he drank and used just like I did. And I knew by the way he carried himself and whatnot, that he was connected to something greater than himself. And so I ended up asking him to be my sponsor. And we got together and we sat down and we started going through the steps. And then we started getting to the whole God part. And I was like, oh, I didn't really want no part of that, the whole God thing. And that sounds kind of like religion to me. I don't know if I could do this. And it's funny how like the teacher will show up when the student's ready. And he said, well, that's cool. He said, I don't call my higher power God. I call him my best friend. And he kind of had my attention at that point. I'm like, all right. And he asked me a question. He said, when you go back to your bunk at night and you lay down and you go to sleep, do you fall asleep like a baby, or when you're laying there all alone, are you in conflict with something? And I had to think to myself, and it would take me hours to get to sleep. I would toss and churn. And I remember him saying, whatever that thing is you're in conflict with, that's what you got to get right with. And that was just like, it really hit home for me. And so God to me was more like this inner voice, this inner consciousness, this thing that, even when I was doing bad, he said, don't do that, dummy. And I would do it anyways. And I get in trouble. And I told you so, And I really want to read out of page 55. It's probably my favorite page in this whole book. And, it says, actually we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every woman and every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God, right? It may be obscured by calamity, which is like chaos, by pomp, which would be like my pride, or by the worship of other things, right? But in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves, the miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. And I just think back to where, way back, these different civilizations that lived on these different continents before we really started traveling the seas and intermingling and whatnot. And you had the Native Americans here, and they had their own idea of God, even though they maybe didn't call it God, maybe they called it the spirit of the universe. And you had people, the Aborigines in Australia, and they had their own idea of God. And maybe you had, people in India or whatnot, which practice Buddhism or whatnot. They had their own idea of God. So it's just kind of, I think, woven in our fabric, this idea that maybe there's a creator or something greater than ourselves. And it says that we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup just as much as the feelings we have for a friend, And I remember him saying, you and I don't know each other very well. And how are we going to get to know each other? And I thought, well, we're going to spend time, we're going to talk. I'm going to listen. You're going to listen. We're going to, start a dialogue. We're going to have to spend time with each other to get to know each other. And I said, your relationship with God shouldn't be any different than that. You're going to have to spend some time with God through maybe some prayer. And every once in a while, I may have to shut up and listen through some meditation and see what God has to say. And it said, we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was much as a fact as we were. And I love this line. This is my favorite line in the whole book. I can't believe it took me to come to Alcoholics Anonymous for you guys to teach me this. It said, we found the great reality is capitalized deep down within us. In the last analysis, it's only there that it may be found, right? It was so with us. And I think back to like all these years of looking for God. I would go to church looking for God, spiritual retreats looking for God. I'd come to these meetings looking for God. I remember sitting at the park one time and I was on a bender and the sun was coming up and I was just really wanted out of the lifestyle I was living. And I had my dog and it was just, I was a lone wolf at that point. And I just remember thinking, looking at Mount Diablo, thinking if I drive up there and pray long and hard enough, maybe God will answer my prayers, And I did that. I drove up there. It's kind of weird and whatnot. And I prayed and all this. And now that I look back on it, maybe he did answer my prayers by getting me into a program, but nothing really happened at the time. My point is, I was looking for God in all the wrong places, everywhere outside myself. And it never dawned on me that maybe God was closer than I ever suspected, And and I asked my guys when I'm working with them, I said, when you're angry and mad and you're, pissed off at the world, where do you feel that anger? And they always say, right here. I said, when everything's going right, you're feeling happy, joyous, and free, where do you feel that joy? And they, right here. And it's like, how could you experience God anywhere else? And through working this process, I found that, the steps are about what I can get rid of so I can form that relationship with that thing within me. And step two really for me was just being willing, and I think circumstances brought me to that point. Step one, to be, life was so tough. It got so bad and so unmanageable. I was willing to do anything. So it was really about just being willing to believe in something greater than myself, which I didn't really know what that thing was yet. And I wasn't ready to call God, that's for sure, because I had some big time resentments towards God. And and I noticed through reading through this chapter, if we know the Bill's style of writing, he says the same thing in a lot of different ways. And but he doesn't like to use the same words, over more than once. And even if you look at step 6 and 7, you got character defects and you got shortcomings, which kind of mean the same thing with different words. He didn't want to repeat himself. And there's a word that really pops out in this chapter to me, and it's the word prejudice. And he said it 7 times in there, and I think he really wants to hit home on that a preconceived notion, an idea of what I think this God thing might be, and to really, I think the opposite of prejudice would have an open mind. So I need to have an open mind, and I need to be willing that perhaps maybe there's something greater than myself. And I don't know where I'm at on time right now. About 2 more minutes. Okay, 5 more. And so yeah. I don't know, I got a lot of spiritual growth to do, but I hear, you come in the rooms and if you have a problem with the word God, use a group of drunks. I don't really like that because, if I'm powerless and you're powerless and you're powerless, the last time I checked, what? 0 times 100 is still 0, right? So, yeah, and another key word in there is for me is came, right? So it doesn't say come to believe. I don't come to have my sanity restored in step 2. If I could come to have that happen, it'd be a 2-step process. It came to believe as a result of working this process. And I think there's a big difference between the word believe. I think we start with the belief that I'm willing to believe in something. The book talks about, Columbus, and I'll use it as an example that, he had the belief that, if he sailed west, he could get east, I believe to the East Indies or whatnot for the trade route, that he could cut some time off the trade route. And so he left with the belief that he could make that happen. And when he discovered America and he came back and told the Queen about it, to fund his second trip. When he went back on a second trip, he went on the faith, and the faith was the knowledge and experience after the fact. And so that's why I'm saying there's a lot of layers of step 2 for me, and on the flip side of it, having that sanity restored, if you look at step 2, it could also be a 10-step promise. Because you got the promises at the bottom of 84, and there's an interesting line. I won't read all the promises, but it says, we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, right? Even alcohol. To me, that's the ultimate definition of recovered. And it says, for by this time, sanity will have returned. Sounds a lot like step 2, came to believe a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. So I believe if I work steps 4 through 9, continue to do that through 10, 11, and 12, that my sanity will be restored. The obsession to drink will be removed, and as long as I stay in fit spiritual condition, I never got to pick up or drink again, and kick off the allergy. And yeah, so so yeah, I mean, I think the key is willingness, have an open mind. And I think that our relationship, our idea of God will evolve in time. And really for me today, like, not to put my beliefs on anyone else, but my experience and my relationship with God is really, I look at it as like the source of all life. And there's many forms of life. And underneath all these forms of life is the one life. And the same life that allows me to breathe and allows me to get up in the morning and move and whatnot. It's the same life that allows a flower to open and allows it to bloom and allows all things to be. And I think it's about just really getting enough junk out of the way so I can form that relationship with that power. And yeah, so I believe step 2 really is the solution, and 3 through 12 will bring me there. And I think that's about it.
Thank you.